Gene Simmons heard 3 notes and stopped the conversation mid-sentence. Paul Stanley, who'd been explaining to their current guitarist why his playing wasn't working out, went quiet. The sound coming from the hallway outside their loft was unmistakable. Someone was tuning a guitar, and whoever it was knew exactly what they were doing. Gene looked at Paul. Paul looked at the door. The guitarist they were about to fire looked confused. Then Ace Frehley walked in, and everything changed. It was April 1973 in a cramped Manhattan loft that smelled like cigarettes and ambition. Gene and Paul had placed an ad in the Village Voice 2 weeks earlier. Lead guitarist wanted for rock band. Must have equipment, transportation, and ability to play. They'd auditioned 17 guitarists over the past 10 days. Guitarist number 3 had been technically brilliant, but dressed like an accountant and stood completely still while playing. Guitarist number 7 had the look and attitude, but could barely play 3 chords. Guitarist number 11 had shown up drunk. Guitarist number 14 had been perfect on paper, solid player, good look, owned his gear, but when Gene asked him about his influences, he'd said, "I don't really listen to music, I just play it." That guy had lasted exactly 90 seconds. Some were technically proficient, but had no stage presence. Others had presence but couldn't play. Most were just terrible. Each rejection made Gene and Paul more desperate and more doubtful. They'd been through 3 different lineups in the past year. They had a vision for what Kiss could be, this over-the-top theatrical rock spectacle, but they needed the right pieces. They'd found Peter Criss on drums through another ad, and Peter was solid. But lead guitar was crucial. That's where the solos lived, where the memorable moments got created. Without the right lead guitarist, Kiss would never be more than another struggling New York band. Gene and Paul were starting to wonder if they'd ever find the right person when the guy with long dark hair and a beat-up guitar case walked through the door without knocking. Ace hadn't even read the full ad. His friend had shown it to him at a bar in the Bronx, said it might be worth checking out. Ace had been between bands for months, playing occasional sessions, doing some teaching, mostly just hanging around. He wasn't desperate for work. He was particular. He'd turned down 3 band offers in the past year because the music didn't interest him, or the people seemed like they'd be a nightmare to work with. When his friend mentioned the Village Voice ad, Ace had shrugged. Maybe I'll check it out. He almost didn't show up. The day of the audition, he'd woken up late in his small Bronx apartment, the same place he'd been living since dropping out of high school to focus on music. The apartment was barely heated, the walls were thin, and his neighbors complained about the guitar playing at all hours. But rent was cheap and it gave him space to practice, which was all that mattered. That morning, he'd made coffee, sat by the window with his guitar, and seriously debated whether this audition was worth the effort. The subway ride into Manhattan would take 45 minutes. He'd have to carry his guitar through crowded trains, deal with the hassle of the city. For what? Another band that probably wouldn't work out? Another group of guys with big dreams and no follow-through? Ace had been playing professionally, in some form, since he was 15. He'd been in garage bands, bar bands, cover bands, original bands. He'd played weddings and bar mitzvahs to make rent. He'd done session work for $50 a pop. He'd tried joining established bands and starting new ones. Nothing had stuck. Either the music wasn't interesting, or the people were impossible to work with, or the band fell apart before anything real could happen. At 21 years old, Ace was already tired of the grind. His girlfriend had walked into the room while he was still debating, saw him sitting there with his guitar but not playing it, just holding it. She knew that look. "Are you going to that audition?" she asked. "I don't know. Probably not. It's probably a waste of time. You've been complaining about being bored for weeks. Just go. Worst case, you waste an afternoon." "That's exactly the problem. Another wasted afternoon. I could stay here, practice, actually improve my playing instead of auditioning for another band that'll fall apart in 3 months. She sat down across from him. "Or it might be the band that actually goes somewhere. You won't know unless you show up." Ace had considered this. She was right. He was bored. More than bored, he was frustrated. He'd been working on his playing relentlessly, developing techniques, exploring different styles, but there was nowhere to apply it. He missed playing with other people, missed the energy of collaboration. Solo practice was fine for building skills, but music was meant to be shared, to bounce off other musicians. Fine, I'll go, but I'm not getting my hopes up. He'd grabbed his guitar case, taken the B train into Manhattan, chain-smoking the whole way, convincing himself this was just another audition that would lead nowhere. When he arrived at the building, a sketchy fourth-floor walk-up with graffiti in the stairwell, his first instinct was to turn around and leave. This didn't look like a place where successful bands were born. It looked like a place where muggings happened. But he'd come this far. Might as well see it through. He'd taken the subway into Manhattan with no expectations, hadn't prepared anything special, hadn't dressed up, just showed up as himself. Jeans, t-shirt, beat-up guitar, Bronx attitude. If Gene and Paul wanted someone polished and professional-looking, they were about to be disappointed. If they wanted someone who could play, they were about to be amazed. Gene held up a hand to cut off the current guitarist. Actually, we're done. Thanks for coming. The guitarist looked confused, then annoyed, but Gene was already moving toward Ace. You, play something. Ace looked up from his tuning. I just got here. I don't care. Play. Ace shrugged, stood up, pulled his guitar out of the case. It was a Gibson, worn but well-maintained. He plugged into the nearest amp, adjusted the volume, and without asking what they wanted to hear or what style they were looking for, just started playing. What came out of the amplifier made Paul Stanley forget he'd been standing. Made Gene Simmons, who prided himself on maintaining professional composure, actually take a step back. Ace wasn't playing a song. He was improvising, feeling out the room, the amp, the vibe. But every note was intentional. Every phrase had direction. It wasn't showy. It wasn't trying to impress. It was just pure, undeniable musicianship. 30 seconds in, Gene looked at Paul. Paul nodded. They both knew. This was the guy. Ace played for maybe 2 minutes, then stopped. You want to hear something specific? Can you play faster? Gene asked. Ace played a blazing run up the fretboard, clean and precise. And can you play melodic? Ace switched to a bluesy, soulful phrase that sounded like it was crying. Can you play rhythm? Ace laid down a groove so solid you could build a house on it. Gene and Paul exchanged another look. They'd been searching for months. They'd auditioned dozens of guitarists. They'd almost given up on finding someone who had both the technical skill and the musical instinct. And here was this guy from the Bronx who'd walked in without an appointment and could apparently do everything. What's your name? Paul asked. Paul Frehley, but everyone calls me Ace. Why Ace? Ace shrugged. I'm good at cards. Gene, who appreciated confidence when it was backed by ability, smiled. You're hired. Can you start rehearsals tomorrow? Ace looked at them like they were crazy. You haven't even told me what kind of band this is. We're going to be the biggest band in the world, Gene said, dead serious. Most people would have laughed. Ace just nodded. Okay, what time tomorrow? That moment, that split-second decision based on 3 notes in a hallway and 2 minutes of improvised playing became the foundation of Kiss. But the real story wasn't just that Gene and Paul recognized talent when they heard it. The real story was that Ace almost didn't come to the audition at all. Earlier that day, Ace had been sitting in his Bronx apartment, guitar across his lap, debating. He'd been burned by bands before, been promised things that never materialized, been told he was essential and then replaced. He'd learned to be cautious, to protect himself, to not get too excited about opportunities that might turn into disappointments. His girlfriend at the time had asked him, "Are you going to that audition?" "I don't know, probably not. It's probably a waste of time. You've been complaining about being bored for weeks. Just go. Worst case, you waste an afternoon." Ace had considered this. She was right. He was bored. He missed playing with other people. Solo practice was fine, but music was meant to be collaborative. Fine, I'll go. He'd taken the subway into Manhattan with no expectations, hadn't prepared anything special, hadn't dressed up, just showed up as himself, jeans, t-shirt, beat-up guitar, Bronx attitude. If Gene and Paul wanted someone polished and professional looking, they were about to be disappointed. If they wanted someone who could play, they were about to be amazed. The 3 notes Gene heard in the hallway became legendary in Kiss history. Different people remembered them differently. Gene said it was a bluesy bend. Paul said it was a jazz-inflected phrase. Ace said he didn't remember what he played, he was just tuning. But everyone agreed that those notes announced something important. They said, without words, "A real guitarist just arrived." After Ace left that first day, agreeing to come back for rehearsal but not signing anything, not committing to anything beyond showing up, Gene and Paul sat in their loft processing what had just happened. They'd been working together for over a year, going through different band names, different concepts, different lineups. Gene, born Chaim Witz in Israel, had changed his name to Gene Klein and then Gene Simmons, trying to shed his immigrant background and become fully American. He'd been in a band called Bullfrog Beer that went nowhere. Paul, born Stanley Eisen, had changed his name to Paul Stanley for the same reason, hiding his Jewish heritage in an industry that wasn't always welcoming. He'd been in a band called Uncle Joe that also failed. They'd met through the New York music scene, recognized in each other a similar hunger, a similar willingness to do whatever it took to make it. But talent and determination weren't enough. They needed the right people. They'd cycled through guitarists and drummers, each lineup showing promise before falling apart. Some guys couldn't handle the ambition, thought Gene and Paul were crazy when they talked about becoming the biggest band in the world. Others had the ambition but lacked the skill. The search for the perfect lineup had become exhausting. Finding Peter Criss had been the first breakthrough. The drummer who answered their ad had energy and could really play. Plus, he could sing, which opened up possibilities for the multi-vocalist sound Gene and Paul wanted. But lead guitar remained the missing piece, until Ace walked through the door. "That's the guy," Gene said after Ace left. "Yeah," Paul agreed. "Did you see his hands, the way he holds the guitar? That's not learned. That's natural. We need to make sure he actually comes back tomorrow." "He'll come back," Paul said. "Guys like that don't walk away from something real, and he knows this is real." Paul was right. Ace came back the next day, and the day after that. Within a week, Kiss had found their lead guitarist. Within a month, they were playing their first shows. Within a year, they were signed to a record deal. Within 3 years, they were the biggest band in America. But it all started with 3 notes in a hallway and a guy from the Bronx who almost didn't show up. The first rehearsal, the day after the audition, revealed something even more important than Ace's technical ability. It revealed chemistry. Gene, Paul, Peter, and Ace played together for the first time, running through some original songs Gene and Paul had written. The sound that came out was immediate and undeniable. Gene's bass provided the foundation, heavy and driving. Peter's drums gave it power and swing. Paul's rhythm guitar and vocals created the melodic structure, and Ace's lead guitar elevated everything, adding the spark that turned good songs into something special. Halfway through the second song, Gene stopped playing and just listened for a moment. Paul noticed and stopped too. Then, Peter. Only Ace kept going, finishing the phrase he'd started, then looking up confused. "What? Did I screw something up?" "No," Gene said slowly. "That was perfect. Keep playing." They'd run through 8 songs that first day, and by the end, all 4 of them knew they'd found something rare. Most bands take months or years to develop chemistry, to learn how to play off each other, to find their collective sound. This band had it from day one. The 4 personalities, the 4 playing styles, somehow fit together like puzzle pieces that had been separated and were finally reunited. "This is it," Paul said after that first rehearsal, once Ace had left and the 3 remaining members were packing up gear. "This is the lineup. We don't need to keep looking." Gene nodded. "We make this work. Whatever it takes, we keep these 4 guys together." Peter, usually the quiet one, added, "That Ace kid is special. Don't let him get away." They didn't. Within days, Kiss was rehearsing daily, developing their sound, writing new material that showcased what Ace could do. Within weeks, they were playing their first shows at small clubs, building a following. Within months, record labels were sniffing around. Within a year, they had a deal. And within 3 years, they were selling out arenas. But it all started with 3 notes in a hallway and a guy from the Bronx who almost didn't show up. Years later, when Kiss was selling out stadiums and moving millions of albums, when Ace was Space Ace with silver makeup and a smoking guitar, interviewers would ask him about that first audition. "Did you know you were joining something special?" Ace's answer was always honest. No, I thought it was just another band. Gene and Paul had big dreams, but everyone in New York has big dreams. I just showed up because I had nothing better to do. But you came back the next day. Yeah, because when we played together, it felt right. Gene on bass, Paul on rhythm, me on lead. The chemistry was there immediately. That doesn't happen often. When it does, you don't walk away from it. Gene's version of the story evolved over the years, became more dramatic in the retelling. By the time Kiss was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Gene's story went like this. I heard 3 notes through the door. 3 notes, and I knew, that's the guy. That's the guitarist we'd been searching for. Everything about Kiss changed in that moment. Paul's version was more practical. We'd auditioned so many guitarists who were technically good but had no soul, or had soul but couldn't play. Ace had both. The minute he started playing, it was obvious. This wasn't a question of maybe or let's think about it. It was immediate. He was Kiss's lead guitarist. We just didn't know it would last 40 years. The other guitarists who'd auditioned for Kiss and been rejected, 17 of them before Ace showed up. Some of them went on to successful careers in other bands. Some quit music entirely. A few of them, years later, would see Kiss on television or read about them in magazines and think about what might have been. One of them, interviewed for a rock documentary in 1998, was asked if he regretted not getting the Kiss gig. I don't regret it, he said. I wasn't right for them. They needed someone with Ace's style, Ace's attitude. I couldn't have done what he did. Nobody could have. He was the perfect fit. That's the thing about auditions. About those moments when paths diverge and futures are determined. It's not just about talent. It's about chemistry, timing, fit. 17 guitarists had talent. Only one was Ace Frehley. The loft where Ace auditioned doesn't exist anymore. The building was torn down in the 1980s, replaced by luxury condos. But for people who care about rock history, who understand that every massive cultural phenomenon starts somewhere small and specific, that loft was sacred ground. That's where 4 guys who would change rock and roll first came together. That's where Gene heard 3 notes and knew. That's where Paul saw Ace play and understood. That's where Kiss began. Ace kept the guitar he played at that audition. Years later, when he could afford any guitar in the world, when endorsement deals meant he had rooms full of custom instruments, he still had that beat-up Gibson from 1973. Occasionally, he'd pull it out for recording sessions, play it on special tracks. The tone was worn, the frets were filed down from decades of use, but it still sounded like the guitar that had convinced Gene and Paul to take a chance on a Bronx kid with no reputation and no connections. In 2019, at a memorabilia auction, someone offered Ace $500,000 for that guitar. He turned them down. That guitar is how I met Gene and Paul. That's how Kiss started. You can't put a price on that. It's not for sale. The lesson of Ace's audition isn't about talent alone. Plenty of talented guitarists auditioned before Ace showed up. The lesson is about the mysterious alchemy of the right person appearing at the right moment, about chemistry that can't be manufactured or predicted, about 3 notes in a hallway being enough to change 4 lives and influence rock music for generations. If Ace had stayed home that day, if he'd decided the audition wasn't worth the trip, if he'd been delayed by 10 minutes and shown up after Gene and Paul had already committed to another guitarist, the entire history of rock and roll would be different. Kiss might have existed in some form, but it wouldn't have been the Kiss that conquered the world. Because that Kiss required Ace Frehley, not a guitarist who played like Ace, not someone technically equivalent. Ace, specifically, uniquely, irreplaceably. Gene Simmons built Kiss into an empire through marketing and determination. Paul Stanley gave Kiss its voice and stage presence. Peter Criss provided the heartbeat. But Ace Frehley gave Kiss its soul, its musical credibility, its proof that beneath the makeup and spectacle was real artistry. And all of that started with 3 notes in a hallway and a decision to walk through a door instead of staying home. Sometimes the most important moments in life announce themselves. Sometimes they're quiet. 3 notes, a guitar being tuned, a door opening. A Bronx kid with no expectations meeting 2 determined guys with massive dreams. and 40 years of history beginning in an instant. If this story moved you, if you've ever had a moment where showing up changed everything, if you've ever wondered what would have happened if you'd made a different choice on an ordinary day, share this. Tell your story in the comments. Have you ever walked through a door that changed your life? Subscribe for more stories about the moments when everything pivots, when destiny finds you, when 3 notes are enough to build a legend.